Is that not on?
Yeah, John Williams needs no introduction. I was very honored to work with him. It was after I did. It was after Platoon, and it was after The Doors, and then we did Nixon. And he was very gracious and worked with us very closely. We moved on to JFK, and then we moved to Nixon was the last of the three, and it sort of is a nice. It's a pattern of three momentous American events. Right. I was very pleased, and to live up to his. This is the most. Tim, you should talk about it. This is the most muted score that I ever had. Oh. In fact, in this room, I couldn't hear much of it, but. I'm not. My ears are a little bit older now, but frankly, I kind of missed some of the louder stuff that he did with us on Born and on JFK. But you're welcome to it.
Oh yeah, I would just add that Born on the 4th of July is a very lyrical, gorgeous, melodic, kind of very feeling score, and it taps into the heartbreak of that movie. JFK taps into the pulse of the conspiracy and of the investigation. And this one, I wouldn't call it muted. It is subdued. It's a lot murkier than the other two, for obvious reasons. But I think there is still something kind of operatic about this score, and it's still in the vein of the heartbreak of the first two that you did with him. That's kind of, it's an informal trilogy, but they all kind of they're about the same period of time, the same kind of momentous epoch of the 60s and 70s and Vietnam and Watergate and Kennedy's assassination, Nixon's presidency. And to me, there's just this pervasive sense of heartbreak and melancholy and tragedy. So even as Nixon is obviously not the great hero of the movie, I mean, he is in some ways, but it's a tragic, it's part of this larger tragedy. And I think you got three of the best scores out of John Williams. As much as I love the first two, Nixon is probably my favorite of the three.
Really?
It's just it's so dark and rich and complex, and when it needs to be operatic, it is, and when it needs to be romantic, it is. And there's all these different flavors and feelings in the score, and I think it just speaks to this big tapestry that you've created with the film.
How many scores did John write?
Total? Over 100.
100 movies?
Yeah.
So, of course, John Williams is known for his scores for these box office blockbusters like Jaws and Superman and Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. Yet you chose, to kind of highlight your book by focusing on this film and this score, which are not as well known on a mass scale as those others. So do you hope that the screening and your book will bring some added appreciation for Mr. Williams?
Definitely. I mean, I think we've all seen Star Wars enough times at this point. Indiana Jones. Great films, great scores. I think Nixon is one of his most underrated, kind of unappreciated scores. And it is in this kind of weird period after those kinds of the run of box office success of the Star Wars movies, all the stuff with Spielberg. He did Jurassic Park and Schindler's List the same year in '93, and then Spielberg took a long break. And John Williams started going into these darker dramas and thrillers and things that were just a little bit different than what, the kind of family fare that he'd been known for. And everything you did with him up to Nixon sort of culminated in Nixon. But yeah, I think the score is a masterpiece. The film is one of my favorite films ever made. I think, selfishly, personally, I think it's your best scripted, best directed, and best acted film. So I wanted to shine a light on the film and on the score, and it's the 30th anniversary, so it felt like a nice time to do it.
So let me ask you, Oliver, what led you to decide to make this movie about one of the most controversial figures in our lifetimes, and at a point, did you want to recapture some appreciation for him, or more paint a tragic portrait of somebody who went through such a downfall?
I wish I could remember all the little ins and outs of the mind, but the truth is that he was a consequential figure of our time, and he was important. And as we can see from the movie, nobody's all good or all
Right.
bad, and he certainly had a so much notoriety and of him, and horrible write-ups too. So I'm somewhat familiar with that, and I wanted to capture the importance of what he was saying in the movie about this country is at a crossroads, and it still is at a crossroads. It seems it's always the same recurring war peace syndrome. It seems like we're going back to Lincoln. It's in the tradition of American politics, which is insoluble, it seems to me. But it's because of that, basically, and I have to credit the co-scripting of Steve Ravel and Chris.
Yeah, I was going to ask how the three of you kind of work together.
Well,
and
I
fashion
have
the
to say it was
script.
Chris and Steve who wanted to do something on Nixon more than I didn't know at that time, but Nixon had been part of my father's generation and is a pivotal figure in the 50s and always talked about in the 60s. And I had gone to Vietnam on that basis
Yes.
too. And after the war, it was an elemental fury in the country that I wanted to document about how this thing gets out of hand. Sometimes it just gets so crazy. And we attribute such self-importance to who we are and what we mean. But as you can see from the ongoing development of American politics, there's always another character who emerges, and several characters who emerge.
Right.
Reagan certainly had a huge impact, and Bush, the second Bush certainly, and they all have an impact. I mean, so it's a process, and I am fascinated by power and how we divide, how power works, and I think you get an idea here of there's a push and a pull on everything, and what you have here in the movie I haven't seen in a while is a soup, a real stew of mixed intentions, good intentions, but sometimes rotten and corrupt means. It has to be. So there's a lot at stake here. It's good that we stop, avoid the headlines, and just think about the long-term characters that we've run into in our lives. As you get older, I think you'll agree, everybody's worth a second, third, and other looks. It's not simple, this story at all.
Yeah. Did you, I mean, of course, a lot of the people depicted in the movie were still alive at the time that you made the movie. Yeah. Did you consult with any of them?
As many as we could.
Uh-huh.
And we had quite a bit of cooperation. We worked very closely with John Dean, who was very active with us, and Alex Butterworth, who was in the film and had a lot to do with the tapes, was there. You may have noticed him.
Yeah.
And Howard. I'm sorry, Jimmy. You have to help me out sometimes. I'm getting old. Howard
Hunt.
Howard Hunt. He was on the set and gave us his piece of the action. Quite a few people were involved. Maybe 10, 15 of these characters.
Right.
But I had to wait until Nixon criticized me heavily for the JFK movie. That was his opinion. But in denying everything that we did, he embraced every fallacy that I was surprised at what he said about me. But I knew I couldn't make this movie when he was alive. Right. He died in 94. We made the film in 95. And of course, we were in for a huge amount of criticism from his family. The Diane Disney was the worst, I think. But there were others. But we had quite a bit of consensus from people who had worked closely with him. I mean, you can't get much closer to his inner sanctum than John Dean, who was in on all these meetings.
Right,
yeah,
right.
The last year. And Haldeman, no. Ehrlichman, no, but
How about Kissinger?
we tried. Kissinger, we tried. We did a lot of research.
Right.
We talked to a lot of people, so.
I was impressed with Paul Sorvino's interpretation of him.
Well, because Nixon, to some degree, when you look at the movie, you say, well, why doesn't he fire the guy? He's such a traitor and all
Right.
that. But you have to see the other side of that argument. He kept him around, and he actually benefited from it because historically, he got more credit for his worldview with the Soviet Union and China. He got a lot more credit for it. Whereas Vietnam diminishes in size, which is, of course, one of the greatest war crimes that involves our country and me too. But that was something that he continued. But when you look at it against the world picture with the other countries, it doesn't seem as corrupt and evil an action as it turned out to be.
Right.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Stone?
Yeah.
You had every reason to hate Richard Nixon. And this could have been a vendetta film. It could have been an angry film. You say humans are complicated. There's two sides. There's good and evil within all of us. But what I'm fascinated by is there's so much romance in this movie. And the time you spend with young Richard and his mother or his brothers, with him courting Pat, with the really tender scenes between him and Pat, or him and his daughters. I guess it's mostly the women in his life. But between the score and the performances and the tears, there's just a lot of compassion and I would say romance in the movie. And I'm just curious why that was important to you.
Well, it's because of the human condition. He really had a tender side. He just had a hard time expressing it in the journey he chose. But I love the music that John did for that. I ended up using quite a bit of it, as I remember. The pastoral time, the Whittier, California time,
Right.
And the wife plays a key role because she basically is going to divorce him in the section after he loses California, and that he begged her to stay, and she made it with him through that. But the music at that point, I wish it had been in a bigger theater. I could have heard it better, but it was really moving. The John Williams score. She's very important in his life, as was his mother, who played a very dominant role in his life. She was, they were Quakers, as you know.
Yes.
And peace at the center was their motto.
Right. Did you, casting Anthony Hopkins, who of course is not an American, but what made you think that he would be the best person to embody this? And he really does bring the character to life.
To be truly honest, we tried with a couple of major American actors, but nobody would touch it.
Interesting.
Because they Warner Brothers wanted some box office, which and they didn't. Anthony was an Englishman, and he hadn't he'd done Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
But that was the only commercial one that he'd done in America. I very much enjoyed his the English butler and the
Other Remains of the Day.
Remains of the Day and Shadowlands.
Right.
So I was very happy to go with him, but I had to fight to get him in. It was last minute. And I actually, who's Liaison Dangereuse? Who was the actor there? John Malkovich. John Malkovich was going to do it. Was on the edge. I called Tony one more time and I said, I'm going to go ahead with him. And he said, no. He was very nervous and was very paranoid about everything. And he said, come to London right away. I just want to talk to you about something. And he said to me right there, I want to do it. I said, well, you've turned me down, and then you pulled out, and now you're screwing up the whole thing again. I got another actor, and if you do this again, I'm going to kill you. He stuck with it, but he almost walked out at another point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Paul Sorvino had destabilized his belief in himself because of his accent. He said, how's my accent? Paul. All wrong, dear boy, all wrong. But I thought he did a good job with the accent and the Americanism, but that's all I needed. I just needed once you inhabit the world of what he needs and what the man is thinking and feeling, you're in. You stay in.
Right, right. And what do you think that Joan Allen brought to it? She also earned a nomination for her
She was
performance.
wonderful. I thought she found the right tonality between her coldness of the real woman as well as the warmth. And she's that all-American, mid-American soul that he was too. I mean, he had a certain. She was the girl next door from his.
Yes, yes.
From his, when he first courted her, he drove his friend a date. Pat had a date with one of Nixon's boyhood association, and he drove both of them. So he was her chauffeur at first.
Huh. Because I think people have the image of Pat Nixon as just being this silent figure in the background who never really asserted herself.
They started at the drama club. No, she wasn't that because she she wanted to be an actress.
Yes.
And no, you can't be an actor or actress without wanting to set a tone.
Right.
She did, but she was certainly a very shy public figure.
But I think you do her justice in the movie.
That's the real place in that area is where they were dating, and she worked at the drama club of the Witcher in that area.
Right.
And he wanted to be an actor as long as she was there.
Right. Let me ask a little bit of Tim in doing your book, and did you have full cooperation from John Williams? Was he resistant? I mean, he's a very public figure, but maybe a little bit sensitive about his own privacy.
For the first 2 years, I had no participation from him. And he explicitly said he didn't want to be a part of it. Not that he was going to stop it, but he wasn't going to be a part of it. So I had to move forward. Oliver was one of the first interviews I did, actually, so I'm very grateful for that. So I built some momentum. I did a lot of research. I just kept chipping away at interviewing everyone I could around him, everyone he'd worked with, and looking in the archives of interviews he'd given in the past. And I was 2 years into it. I was almost at the deadline of turning in my manuscript when I get the mysterious invitation to come meet him at his office. And he was very wary and very, resistant, but I think he knew about the project. He knew it was going to happen with or without him. It was right around the same time that Steven Spielberg was going to start making a documentary about him. He turned 90 that year, so it was sort of this confluence of factors that I think allowed him to crack the door open to me. And one meeting led to another, and there was sort of a series of tests that he gave me, but I guess I passed them. And yeah, I ended up meeting with him for about 18 months and talking to him at great length about pretty much anything I wanted to. I mean, he's not the most forthcoming on some subjects, but it was amazing. It went from nothing to as good as I could have imagined in terms of access.
Right. So, Oliver, you've done films about other real people with Born on the 4th of July and people involved with JFK, George W. Bush. You did a film about him as well. Any thoughts about doing something about our current president?
I couldn't be. I don't think I'd qualify because it's so contradictory and so.
Right.
I would not treat it like certainly the Los Angeles and American press is. No, I don't agree with that. But what I see much more depth to it. And he was in my movie. I actually cast him back in Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. And I had to cut him not because he was bad, but because he was simply too long. The movie was too long.
Right.
So, but I think he's a fascinating figure, but I don't understand. I don't understand certain depths there, and I wouldn't hesitate. I don't want to do it until I'd rather do a story about. Actually, my next plan would be to do a fictional character.
Right.
No one knows about.
That's safer in some ways, yes. Right. Well, anyway, thank you both for joining us tonight, and thank you all for